Now crossing over to the United States, the city of Ferguson, which has recently been witnessing heightened tension over the killing of an unarmed teenage black citizen. Now, in the latest development, U.S. authorities have replaced local leaders with those working for the federal government. For more on that, we were earlier joined by our correspondent, Caleb Mopan, in Ferguson.
Local leaders who have been arrested. There was a young man last night, a local young man who came to the crowd who was trying to tell the media about how he was shot in the face with a rubber bullet, and he had a wound on the side of his face from where he was struck by a rubber bullet at close range in his face. And as he was trying to speak to the media, the police were pulling him away. There's been a real effort, a real feeling that the media coverage of the protests and the media coverage of the confrontation is what is really sparking the anger here. And so as the police have stepped back, as the armored cars and the National Guard are not visible, and more moderate leaders from the African American community, religious leaders are coming in and urging people not to march, urging people to trust President Barack Obama. As that's happening, we're seeing kind of a de-escalation. However, there have been calls from around the country as radicals from around the country are also calling to pile in, and forces that are looking to escalate the situation are also coming in. So it could be an issue, but there are reports about outside agitators trying to say that it's people in the community who don't want to do this. But it's clear that there are a number of people in the community who did this. This would not have happened if it weren't for local forces who are filled with real anger. And there are a number of people still being held and locked up. The numbers are not clear who are still being held and prevented from being out here on the street and continuing to lead demonstrations.
Well, Ferguson residents are outraged by the police blockade, which has them trapped in their own community. Let's listen to a couple of locals.
That I run a 24-hour facility is really hard for me because the only way I can get around is to ride a motorcycle. Well, half the time I need a car or a truck, which I have plenty of, and I can't drive them because I can't get them out of the neighborhood. And even when you go down the side streets that they had, that we were able to somewhat escape out of, you can't even escape out of them areas no more because every road coming into this area has been blocked off.
You lock this down for a week and some people might have a newborn child or a sick parent that stays with them or anything like that, and they can't go get their medicine because Walgreens is on the outside, on the outskirts of the area that's not being, blocked off or anything like that. Like, it's not right. You shouldn't do people like that. We being held in captivity like animals.
Well, U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder says one of the duties of law enforcement is to reduce tension in volatile areas such as Ferguson, Missouri. Let's take a listen.
During the course of my visit, I met with law enforcement as well as community leaders. We had, I think, constructive discussions about the importance of maintaining peace, averting future acts of violence or vandalism, and ensuring public safety, as well as the need for outreach and engagement to rebuild a fractured trust between the community and the law enforcement community that it serves. A few things have affected me as greatly as my visit to Ferguson. I had the chance to meet with the family of Michael Brown. I spoke to them not just as Attorney General, but as a father of a teenage son myself. They, like so many in Ferguson, want answers. In my conversations with dozens of people in Ferguson yesterday, it was clear that this shooting incident has brought to the surface underlying tensions that have existed for many years. There is a history to these tensions, and that history simmers in more communities than just Ferguson. Law enforcement has a role to play in reducing tensions as well.
Well, let's take a look at the situation unfolding in Ferguson, Illinois. We're going to cross over to Washington, D.C., joined by member of Black Autonomy Network Community Organization, Dr. Randy Short. Dr. Short, thank you so much for being with us. Interesting situation taking place on the ground as we see. On the one hand, we had reports, various stations are talking about the de-escalation of what's happening in Ferguson as far as protests. On the other hand, we're getting reports from our correspondent on the ground that many people, want to join in demonstrations, but basically they are blocked. And we've just seen actually a clip talking about those residents who need to get out of the area for whatever reasons, but can't because then there will not be allowed inside. And then on the other hand, we see what many say are these imposed leaders being put to sort of, many would say, hijack the protesters on the ground as opposed to the actual local leaders. Tell me your thoughts on these, sir.
Well, there are many things that come to mind. The most important thing that I think needs to be said is that the government is doing damage control. The United States is a racial cauldron. African American people are not free. We do not have our human rights. It's evidenced by what's happened to people in Ferguson. Much of what was said by Mr. Holder is dishonest. He has not met with the young protesters. I am acting as a consultant for the Human Rights and Justice Coalition. He has not met with them. In fact, the FBI had people, spies, infiltrators, pick out the young leaders who had been courageous, and they're jailed. As many as 130 people are in jail. They're being intimidated, they're being mistreated as I speak. And to call it tension, this is a lack of freedom. This is a violation of even the civil rights we barely have by the government. And they haven't cordoned off the white area. They haven't cordoned off the soldiers that have shot 14, 15 people. They haven't even done anything about the local Ku Klux Klan that's raised close to $60,000 as a defense fund for the officer that murdered this boy. So in reality, you know, it just shows the fear. And also, this looks quite staged on a certain level. It reminds me of the Boston Marathon bombing. The American public is being manipulated into accepting the militarization of the police force. And what I really dislike the most is Mr. Holder's talking about one murder. Some 3,000 Americans have been murdered by the police since he's been Attorney General. Some of them have probably died from guns that he sent to Mexico for Mexicans to die. People are dying in Chicago as a result of him arming narco-terrorists. When are they going to investigate the thousands of murders? And taking over one government, frankly, we need to shut down the one we have and start all over again. You know, the real problem is rooted in the fact that our system does not have justice, fairness, or equality. And it doesn't matter if you put a Barbadian face or a brown face or a Kenyan American face Obama. We are not doing what a so-called free and fair society does. And in reality, I doubt if any justice will come to the Brown family. What you need to know is that the people in Ferguson and therearound are calling for a national boycott starting Monday, the 25th, which is the funeral date for Michael Brown Jr., and they're calling on people to boycott banks. We have to challenge the capitalistic, fascistic, racist system of this country, and the cry is for human rights. African American people, as I've said many times on PressTV, we do not have human rights. We were not freed by the 13th Amendment, and in fact, people who've enslaved and abused another are very unlikely to free them. So the farce of this so-called American democracy, the farce of this post-racial apartheid here, it's shown before the world that the same America that kills in Afghanistan and Iraq and kills through proxies in Syria and Libya, abuses its own citizens and denies their human rights. And there's no nice way to get around it. And to call it tensions as if it's reciprocal or that it's on both sides is garbage. We've been ruled unfairly by Anglo-Americans, and we need our freedom. And the United States just got blasted by the United Nations High Commission on Human Rights. Their ICERD committee has ruled the United States has a real problem with discrimination. And in fact, we need to be up from under people like Mr. Holder, I don't care if he's black, or the system of injustice in Missouri that the people know they cannot trust.